actually the first mega experiment that BCFG embarked upon, and after that, I'm actually going to do something of an epilogue to that, inspired by Danny. So we had breakfast with Bob, we'll have a reception with Richard, we'll have a digression with Danny. And then it will be my pleasure to speak about a smaller mega study, so a mini mega study in high schools. So Katie.
Thanks, Angela. Okay, so thank you to many of you, by the way, for predicting how this turned out. Thank you to many of you for contributing to this mega experiment. I'm going to start by actually just reminding everybody of where this began, because we've expanded our team since our first gathering. This is actually a team meeting, not a conference. I don't know if you know, we're all on a team together. But at any rate, I just wanted to sort of set the stage why we did this, remind you what we're up to. This afternoon, we're going to talk about what's next and try to suck you into designing studies and those projects. And today I'm going to tell you about our first mega study. So as I think most of you remember, hopefully, Angela and I, for some bizarre reason, thought it was a good idea to try to get $100 million. And I have to just say, thank God we didn't, because even with the amount of money we had, I don't know, we weren't ready for $100 million. Maybe in like 5 years we'll be ready. But we were really inspired by this call from the MacArthur Foundation to try to solve a major social problem of our time. And we felt like this group of people could tackle enduring behavior change. So we threw our hats in the ring. And I don't know if you guys know how we did, but we did okay. We made it to the round of 200, which is pretty good, very respectable. And then Sesame Street won. So, you know, what can you do? Okay, so our pitch, right, was to solve enduring behavior change. And we had 3 pillars. One was health behavior change, which, you know, with Kevin very heavily involved, I was sort of leading. Angela was really leading behavior change in schools. And then we have a third pillar, which we haven't quite gotten to yet, but will soon. And Shlomo is going to talk a bit more about that, which is financial decision making. But today I'm going to talk about where we began on health decision making. And this statistic always motivates me because it feels like, speaking of, you know, Chaldini was just talking about big things that really matter. This is a big problem related to behavior change. I don't know if we found the big things that really move it, and we'll talk more about that today, but it sure feels like there's potential here. So this is where we started. This is just a graph made of data from 24 Hour Fitness. I'm going to talk more about our partnership with them in a moment. And their president, Frank Napolitano, is actually here. So thank you, Frank, for being here and for all of your support. And LaShawn Dale as well, who's been our key partner. So really, really grateful for their incredible support of this work. This is a data set from them. Let me just show you, or like sort of get you comfortable with what this graph is showing. What it is just, we decided to say, basically how autocorrelated are we? To what extent can we predict our future behavior with our own past behavior? And the orange dots are basically saying, hey, okay, I'm gonna look at Angela. I'm gonna say how well can I predict how often Angela will go to the gym this week if I know how often she went to the gym last week? Like, what's my best estimate? And the answer is about 0.8. She'll go about 0.8 as many times this week as she went last week. That's my best estimate. Well, how about if I just use 2 weeks ago, Angela? And we can see is how it curves off. But what I think is amazing, 1, how high it starts, and 2, even 52 weeks out in this panel with 2 million people, you know, you're half of who you were last year. So, you know, maybe you think that's changing a lot. I think that's remarkably stable for a human being. If you think about the placebo, like, okay, well, what would it be if we just took a random person and predicted Angela with them last week, and we kept the time syncing, so we know there's seasonality. That's the blue line, you get nothing. Interestingly, if we know like a lot about you, we can do better. So the placebo line that's in red shows you if I know what time it is, like what time of year, seasonality, what age you are, what gender you are, what income you are, what education level you have, and your zip code, and I basically draw your placebo person from that subset. Now we're getting closer to looking like you, but still, you look kind of stable and kind of like yourself. So I just think that's an interesting factoid that jumps out of the data, is how stable our behavior is. Sure, we're a bit like our nearest neighbor, but there's like much more signal in how stable our own patterns of behavior are. So we were sort of curious, like, is this just gym data? And we grabbed a couple other data sets that we had handy and basically saw really similar patterns. I'll show you just 2 more to show you how consistent this is. This one's not quite as rich. This is a panel of 879 Fitbit users, daily step counts that I had sitting around from an old project. It's not quite, and by the way, there are standard errors plotted in these graphs. They're just tiny, so you can't see them. Okay, so this is, it looks kind of similar, although the placebos don't get nearly as high. This is like how many daily steps people take. They're very consistent over time. They start at 0.7. After 16 weeks, they go down closer to 0.5 again, but still like really remarkably stable and high relative to placebos. And then a final panel in a really different setting. This is actually doctors and nurses and how frequently they sanitize their hands on a weekly basis, their average sanitizing rate when they enter patient rooms. It's supposed to be that they do it all the time. On average, people are at about 50% compliance. And this is just looking within person. How stable are your rates over time, and how stable are you compared to a placebo that's just time synced versus a placebo that's like someone else in your exact unit, so at your hospital, in your specialty. And again, I think it's just remarkable how consistent humans are. There is some, downward trend over time, but it is amazing how much we are creatures of habit. So that is all to say, this is part of why we think it's so important to understand, well, what creates those habits? What creates this incredible internal autocorrelation? Okay, so we want to learn, how can we make those habits better? How can we get people on the upward trajectory and all these positive behaviors because they're so sticky? And that brought us to the Behavior Change for Good initiative, or our ideas for this. And the basic model that we've been working with is there's all these people, billions of them, I'm told, who want to change their behavior on some dimension. And then there's a lot of organizations out there that serve these people, 24-Hour Fitness being a great example, but many other partners that we're working with as well. And then there's us, like all these scientists, right, with our crazy ideas it's easy to get into the lab, but it's harder to get into the field. And we said, like, what if we just built a platform? We sort of made a collective investment and made it easier for us to get to these people by partnering with the organizations, taking the fixed costs, bringing people to our platform, getting data from the organizations about the daily decisions people are making. And that's kind of our model in running mega experiments, many studies in parallel. And I'll show you really a case study, our first project with 24-Hour Fitness. But that's what we're up to. And this is a weird slide. When I made this slide, people were like, where are you going with this? Is there going to be a fly in the gym? Are you a fly in the wall? Like, what's going on? And what I'm trying to say with this very weird slide is, to me, gyms are kind of like, as fruit flies are to genetics research, gyms are to habits research. So, I don't think there's a better, it's not what you thought I was going to say. I'm not sure there's a better place to begin in studying habits, and so much of the early work from Charles Ganese to Justin Sidner's work has been in gyms. And I think there's a natural reason for that. It's such a great place to observe whether or not people are sticking to their habits, because unobtrusively we know if they go or not, because gyms have to keep people who aren't members out. So they have to have some way of validating who comes in. People are trying to do it on a kind of regular basis. And so it's just a really nice laboratory. Whereas with food, it's hard to get people to tell you what they're eating. With study habits, it's hard to see who's opening a book when. With gyms, we've really got this amazing data. So that's where we started. And our first mega experiment was this partnership with 24-Hour Fitness, which is a 4 million member, roughly. Is that right, Frank? Roughly, I've got it roughly right. Gym chain, and I'm not sure if you have 430 locations at the moment. It seems like you're always growing, but that was roughly true when I made this slide like 6 or 9 months ago. And what we did is we built a digital program to encourage members of 24-Hour Fitness to exercise more. And it was, of course, an experiment. It was all for you, all for us, all for our science, but also all for the members and to actually try to help them. So we, marketed it the way you would market any real product, even though this one was built by scientists for science and not for profit. We got a great designer to work with us on this who had actually built ClassPass to do all the graphics. And our program terms are also an IRB consent form. And we went out and invited these 4 million members, come be a part of this, come sign up for this program. And after people enrolled, that's when we randomly assigned them to different experimental conditions. So I should note that we thought we already knew a bit about what created behavior change. And so we wanted to actually provide people with real value. Of course, we have a holdout control condition. So, we're doing science, so we had to have a placebo condition. So some people signed up, and that was basically the end of their experience. We said, good luck with your life, and I'll talk about that later. But most people got what we considered best practice. And what we put into that best practice, which will be familiar to many of you, is first repeated rewards for exercising. So lots of research has established that when you pay people for exercising repeatedly for as little as a month, it can lead to enduring behavior change. So we paid everyone. I should note right now, these rewards were tiny. And that's an interesting feat, and this was cost constrained. We didn't get $100 million, even though we tried to. So the rewards we offered were on the order of magnitude of $0.25 per workout. And of course, we obfuscated that by using points. And, we pre-tested. Anyway, there's a little sneakiness in this. But hopefully, it's sneakiness for a good cause. So they get repeated rewards for exercising. Gabrielle, somewhere in the audience, so very influenced by her work and her husband's work on planning prompts and implementation intentions. So we asked everyone to choose the dates and times they intended to exercise over the next 28 days. And people made these plans, and then they're going to get reminders 30 minutes before those planned times to work out. And then this is just a little and we didn't think this was something so crazy. We thought it would work. With John and a couple of wonderful graduate students, we'd done a study at Google where we basically used this intervention and we produced behavior change that lasted for about 40 weeks after a 28-day program that had those features. So we were, it's not huge behavior change, but about a 10% lift, if I'm remembering my math correctly. So we thought okay, we're using best practices. We think this will work. This is where the magic happened. Then we said to you guys, and this is what we plan to do in future studies as well, we basically put out an RFP to you. Give us your best ideas. We want you to build on top of these elements that we think of as best practice. We're going to run A/B tests of your ideas to improve on this. And most people inserted their ideas here. So during the registration process, we have these people's full attention. What do you think we should layer on top of this to build more lasting behavior change? And then we sent people on their way. The other element of our program, which lasted for 28 days, is that we sent text reminders to people 30 minutes before their scheduled exercise. And also we reinforced whatever elements of your study designs you wanted us to reinforce by sending interactive text messages. So this is just an example. We also sent once weekly email messages to folks saying whatever you asked us to say. So at minimum, we reminded them of the dates and times when they were scheduled to exercise, but many of you chose to insert an element of your treatment messaging into these emails as well. So if you would encourage people to do workouts in the way that would be maximally fun, we would reinforce that by sending them text messages. Hey, don't forget, did you do a fun workout this week? And we'd remind them again in their emails. Okay, so that's the experiment. As a reminder, this mega experiment had 53 different treatments designed in the end. There were 20 different pre-registered studies by different teams, many in this room. We ended up with a total sample size that was a little shy of our hopes and dreams, but pretty awesome nonetheless. So we had 63,000 participants in the study, roughly. They skewed a little female. And so here's just a little bit of information about them. We recruited them over a longer time period than expected, which is another thing that's sort of interesting and may lend itself to cool analyses later. We expected to recruit for a month and have everybody come in, and then recruitment was a little slower than expected, story of my life. And so we ended up extending the recruitment period to include Black Friday of gyms, which is January. As a result of that, we have a lot of interesting seasonal variation to play with in our study. Okay. This is just a photo of all of the members of the team who designed studies. I think it's pretty amazing how many people were involved in this effort. And actually, I think Angela and I aren't on here, so we designed them too. And we tested too many things for me to actually go through right now. But if anyone wants the long list or the handout and or wants to see all our pre-registrations, I can share that afterwards. But lots of different things, from economists testing different incentive schemes to psychologists testing different ways of framing what exercise is. Really diverse set of ideas that we thought were really interesting. And I'm going to start with good news. I also have lots of bad news because science is hard. Angela and I were like, maybe we should just have a hashtag up during the entire conference that says science is hard, and that is the main thing we learned. But we learned a lot. So, okay, first of all, let me give you some good news. So during the 28 days of our intervention period, this is what our data looks like. And I want to start by just pointing out our empty, I think these are missing. No, they're not. This says, ignore those labels. This is the empty placebo program where we said, hey, good luck with your life. We hope everything goes well. They signed up and then they basically never heard from us again. Beautifully, one really nice thing is it was outperformed directionally by every single other treatment arm in the 52. So that's good. We're not making things worse. That's great. Okay. So like, I stopped sweating and waking up in the middle of the night screaming. So blue is our best practice program, the thing that we thought we already knew worked. So that was, planning, reminders, and rewards for exercise and nothing else. And we did do an RCT that just tested that. That was one of the 20 conditions. And that significantly outperformed the empty placebo program. You can see we have a lot of variation in how other things did. So more good news. A majority, there's different ways of analyzing the data depending on if you run one big model where you would adjust for things, or if you analyze the study separately, you get slightly different numbers. But somewhere between 55 and 75% of our programs that were designed by team scientists, significantly at an alpha of 0.05, I've done no Bonferroni correction, so you have to do that in your head, significantly outperformed the placebo. So again, this all sounds like good news, and no program significantly reduced gym visits. I'm gonna get to the bad news, I promise. I'm starting with all the good news. Let's do good news first. Another thing that's really interesting is thinking about what happens after the 28 days. So are there post-intervention effects? I promise I will get into what studies and whatnot, but I wanna show you this first. So the first thing that's kind of interesting about the data is if we look at the 4 weeks of the intervention, during the 24-day intervention, and we look at the 4 weeks after, and we just plot average weekly gym visits by treatment group, there's a very strong, I would say pretty linear, that's my eyeball linear model, relationship between the two, which is also consistent with the model we had of the universe, which is if we get people to go more, they keep going more. And it doesn't, there's not intrinsic motivation crowd out or something, and then you'd see a downward sloping line, or just nothing. So that's a pretty strong correlation. And we ran, I think, a very clever analysis to try to understand exactly what we're getting in terms of returns long-term. Sorry, John, to embarrass you by putting you up there, but John had a very clever insight in a previous project that he helped us port into this one, which is just, why don't we treat our 53 different treatment arms as instrumental variables? So we randomly assign people to treatments. They're instruments for how much people went to the gym during our intervention. Normally, right, if you're saying how much exercise do you get for every extra gym visit someone makes this week, well, normally there's inherently endogeneity in that, right? Because you're more motivated or whatever. But because we randomly assign people to conditions that were more or less motivating, we can use that as an instrument and say, for every extra gym visit we induced, that we causally induced you to make during our study, what are the returns post-intervention? How many extra gym visits do you make? Okay, so we have the ability to do that in a pretty nice way. And what I think is remarkable is how stable our estimates are. We have a big data set. So if we get you to go to the gym, we get you to make one extra weekly gym visit per week. So that would be 4 extra visits over 28 days. In the week immediately after the intervention ends, we're seeing 0.4 return on that in terms of weekly gym visits. That's pretty good. And then we actually literally made this graph for every week independently, and you can see, it sloped downward, but even 20 weeks later, the returns are only half of what they were 1 week. So again, the creature of habit thing really does feel right in this data. Here's another way of looking at the same thing that's smoother. We just expand the window. We say, let's look at 1 week out. Now let's look at week 0 to 1, 0 to 2, 0 to 3, 0 to 4. And so it smooths very naturally, of course. But this is sort of just how you aggregate it. And we haven't even run past 20 weeks, but we will. And when does it go to 0? It's going to be a long time. It's clear that those returns are lasting. So this is all the good news first. Okay, now let me give you some really bad news. I have more bad news coming, but this is my first piece of bad news. We were really focused in this project on how do we increase enduring exercise, right? What happens post-intervention? And there was enough variation to estimate those models I just showed you, because we get some people going post-intervention. We get pretty much nothing, though, when we look at our treatments. Which treatment won the race to create the most enduring behavior change? And the answer is, well, a couple did win the race, because some do by noise, but basically we got nothing. I mean, really, that's the way to think about it. So when you compare the placebo group to the minimum treatment, the effect is 0. That is a pretty precisely estimated 0, by the way. And when you look at all those other gray lines, you're like, oh, maybe there's something. There is nothing. That is noise. 3 treatments designed by team scientists produce significantly more, right? And if you do the Bonferroni correction in your head, that's 0, right? Nothing. So we did not create enduring behavior change with this intervention. So that's a big bummer, because that was our whole mission. So, okay, we can all start thinking about this, and I hope there will be lots of conversation about like, oops, why did a bunch of the most brilliant people in the world totally fail to achieve their goal? Probably you can blame me. It's probably my fault, but also here's some other thoughts. So one idea, and by the way, we're not quitting, because Angela's the queen of grit, so we're gonna like keep doing this. And obviously we're like, okay, let's get up, we learned, we're gonna do it better next time. Some of the things we think might, obviously this is all wild speculation, have been problems. One question, or one thought is like, maybe 28 days was too short, right, to really create lasting change. Maybe we were just like bullish on 28 days, and it just wasn't enough, especially when we're getting smaller lifts than have been seen in past studies, because we didn't use big incentives. Maybe we need to run much longer interventions than that. And so in some of the projects we're going to talk about that we're doing next and starting later today, we're planning interventions to last more like 6 months. So that's one possibility. Another thing that didn't go great was recruitment. And I think that is important. So we did this as an opt-in study rather than an opt-out study, and we're going to try doing some opt-out studies. Kevin's going to talk about some of our work in that we're planning there. But we got about 1% of the people we were trying to recruit. And you guys know what happens when the most eager 1% sign up for something, right? Like, they may not have been the people most desperately in need. I'll show you some data on that in a second. So maybe we got people who are already highly motivated. It was like harder to lift them, maybe, possibly. Our technology was not awesome. I will say, we are not Google. There were bugs. We did not implement this perfectly. And that may be part of why we didn't create, like revolutionize things, though I doubt that was the key thing. One of the biggest limits of the technology that we didn't win $100 million and we were trying to do something, get it up fast. I think what we built was really cool. We couldn't do anything social. And I think social is a big deal. I think, Bob, you said it, right? Like, we care about our families. There's great research by lots of people in this room, for instance, showing things like, hey, if you're going to be shamed to your family, if you didn't do this, if you didn't achieve your commitment, that could really matter. We didn't have any ability to sign people up in groups, tell them real live social norms of how others were doing. This wasn't part of the technology, and it will be in future iterations. There's also no reactivity. So we don't know if you checked into the gym until like 72 hours later, so we can't text you and be like, awesome job coming to the gym, do it this way, do it that way, how did your workout go? So we couldn't do that, and I think some of those limits also may have limited our ability to have a big effect. It was also, we did this on the cheap, so maybe 21 cents wasn't the magic number to pay people. Although, it's nice that we did see 75% of the programs roughly creating significant benefit relative to placebo control at that cost. So that's, on the one hand, okay, that's good. On the other hand, maybe we could have seen more lift and differentiation between things. And then finally, there is a lot of seasonal noise. Heng Chen and I have studied the fresh, where are you, Heng Chen? Heng Chen and I have studied the fresh start effect. We believe that timing matters. And there is a lot of seasonal variation over the course of this, which makes it harder than if we had sort of studied people in a more more controlled settings, like a single month of recruitment. And so, that. This is an interesting graph, I think, just showing you what was going on with the people we did recruit. So we actually have data, thanks to Frank and LaShawn, on everybody at 24 Hour Fitness who was a member during this time period. And what we did is we just created a graph, first, of everyone who signed up for our studies and what their weekly workouts looked like prior to signing up for the study. These are all pre-sign-up, compared to other 24-Hour Fitness members who didn't sign up, but we weighted this so that it's literally the same time period, because you're like, well, maybe those people, it's all January. We have just as many January people in this dot as in that dot. So the placebo takes care of that. What you can see is, one, something crazy was happening to these people right before our study started. They decided they were going to lose weight, they were going to get in shape, they had a wedding coming up, something, and then they saw our study and they were like, oh, this will help. But they were already on the upswing. The week before they signed up for our study, they'd gotten really into going to the gym. So that's interesting. And also, on average, they were way more motivated than your typical person going more. So that's just, we're intrigued by these sample selection issues and what it says about if we want to create enduring behavior change. Should we be looking for the people who are raising their hands, or should we actually be trying to nudge people who aren't raising their hands? So we're going to do some opt-out studies with other populations and actually try to compare what happens with opt-in versus opt-out. Okay, so you're probably wondering, like I showed you about a bunch of graphs without labels, like which of these 53 treatment arms did increase gym visits. And you already know none of them worked in a lasting way, but some of them worked during the 28-day program, right? So I'll tell you what our big winners were. They were not what we expected. First I should just show, this is just our planning rewards and reminders, our best practice treatment. They got all excited the first week, and then things kind of slowed down a little, and then they basically just tapered right off. So this is just showing you that. So, but at least like what we thought we knew was true about the universe held true, so we replicated that. Our best performing treatment arms are these. Okay, so we had one study we ran with Audible. They partnered with us to give free audiobooks because I've done some research before on something I call temptation bundling. If you get people to like do something fun at the gym, like listen to an audiobook, maybe that can increase their workout. So it turns out we thought we had this cool design where some people we just gave them audiobooks and didn't explain, but they were in a gym study, and other people we gave audiobooks and were like, there's a thing, temptation bundling, try it. Well, it turns out those didn't differ from each other, but the best treatment was just giving people an audiobook. Maybe they figured out temptation bundling on their own, I don't know. Or maybe they just like free stuff. I guess we'll have to try to dig into that, but that was the best treatment. Weird. But it worked pretty well. Okay, another thing, I'm a little sad and embarrassed to say, like, what else worked really well? Turns out in one of our treatments, we varied the size of the incentives we gave people. It was not because we wanted to test if bigger incentives worked. It was like part of another study, but bigger incentives worked. So that's another thing we discovered. Wow, rocket science. Okay, and then this one, I don't know what to make of this. We gave you these are the top 5 treatments. We had a quiz we gave people where we asked them to reflect on their level of commitment to different things in their lives. Things like, their family, their friends. Do you consider yourself really committed? And then we said, this quiz, it was actually meant to be a control condition for another element of the study. We just said, this quiz is predictive of how people do in life, and we're sort of asking you these questions to tailor your program to you. But that was it. And that worked really well. So we're not really sure why. We'll have to think about that more. Probably we'll have to run some follow-up studies. But anyway, that works quite well. Okay, here's the fun part, and Angela's going to talk more about this in a minute. I'm sure you all have a guess of how well researchers' pre-registered primary hypotheses held up in our data. And the answer is abysmally. So we pre-registered that holdout control against our minimum treatment, basically like planning reminders and incentives, which we thought we were just replicating. That was true. That held up. It was validated. There were 19 other pre-registered primary hypotheses. 0 of them held up. 0. So, Angela's going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. I'm not quite done. I'm giving you a couple of key takeaways. We were pretty surprised by that. And we'll talk about why. We have a lot of time to talk about why. Okay, so here are my key takeaways. I think sample selection issues are a big part of this kind of science, and we're going to think about that more. I think we're okay at changing behavior during interventions, but we were surprised that these bigger incentives and transfers seem to do more than nudges. We did really badly at enduring behavior change. When I think about why our pre-registered hypotheses didn't work out, my best guess, we've talked a lot about this, my best guess is maybe we gave you guys a tough control condition, which actually worked really well, and it kind of like operated on the main barriers that we could really nail with this type of technology. So we got the forgetting with the reminders, we got the planning, and we got like thinking about obstacles and all that, and we got the incentive to give a little motivation, and then doing more on top of that with the kind of technology you had was hard. I think that may have been part of it, because you all did really well relative to the holdout control of nothing. So we could beat nothing really well, but beating something pretty good, we were really not good at. So that's interesting, and science is hard. We have a lot left to learn. I think there's a lot more going on. One thing I am excited about, and this will mostly focus on the holdout control comparison where there is a lot of variability. Sendel and Lyle, who's here, are leading a team. We have a postdoc starting in July. We're going to do a bunch of machine learning to try to understand whose curves, for instance, really take off. Who gets those benefits? When I was showing you the instrumental variables analysis, like who are the people who are getting the most out of an extra induced gym visit, for instance, and are there interesting heterogeneous treatment effects? Like maybe the people who weren't going to the gym a ton are really going to take off. So we'll learn a lot from that, and with this really wide panel of data, we have an opportunity to do a lot there. Okay, one other thing I'm gonna say before when I have 6 seconds left, but I'm almost done, and then we're gonna do questions. Bonus. We're sneaky scientists, so we were looking for every opportunity we could to run studies, and when we were paying people at the end, right, we owed people a couple bucks for how many gym visits they'd made, and we're gonna pay 63,000 people a few bucks, that's a lot of money, and we were like, well, why don't we ask them to donate it back to us, and let's run some experiments. So we did more science, so we actually ran a series of experiments. These were sequential rather than simultaneous to try to get participants to just donate their money back to us instead of accepting their $2 payment. And Erica Kyrgios, where are you, Erica? Here, who's an amazing doctoral student, she led the charge on these, and she'll be happy to tell you about them. We did much better on these than our pre-registered hypotheses. Half of these worked, which is another interesting thing. Like, part of the reason we built this team to do persistent stuff is persistence we thought is really hard, and it was. We're better at changing the single decision point. I guess that won't come as a shock to any of you. This is my favorite finding that worked. We are calling it the reward recasting effect. Basically, we just emailed people and said, hey, you already got your reward. You built an exercise habit. You want to donate back to us? Versus just saying, do you want to donate back to us? So we just added a little twist, and that worked. So it had a pretty significant effect it's small, but it's very significant because it's a big sample. And then we replicated an MTurk study that was also pre-registered, and the effect was huge there when we really had people's attention. People, in this case, wrote letters to hospitalized children, and then we invited them to sort of treat that experience as the reward as opposed to accepting their cash payment, and they were twice as likely to forego pay in that setting. So we think that's super interesting, and we have some mechanism data, and Erica will be at the breaks if you want to talk to her about it. But anyway, we were good at getting donations, so we're not bad at everything. Just bad at enduring behavior change. Okay, I'll say thank you there. I think I have like a couple minutes for questions before Angela is going to talk about the prediction project many of you participated in and some stuff we did in schools. Any questions about our colossal failure? Yes?
Hey, did any of the treatments try to influence quality of the gym workouts, or was it all quantity?
Well, we didn't measure quality. So all of the outcome variables were the same. That was kind of part of the model of the mega experiment, this comparability across all the studies. So, but some of the interventions, the manipulations were focused on the quality of the workout. So I would say our intervention with the audiobooks, where we said, hey, listen to an audiobook while you're exercising and try to enjoy that more. And we had one we called Make It Fun, where Zayela, based on some of her previous work with Caitlin Woolley, that Edward Chang led, don't know where everyone is, that was like, hey, do the workout you'll find most enjoyable. And actually, that was one of the top performers. It did quite well. It just wasn't significant, but it did pretty well relative to others. So those focused a little bit more on the quality, but we only measure the quantity. Yeah.
Can you say a little more about the quiz? Like, it sounded a little bit like an affirmation. I did some
Yeah.
of the predicting before, so there was I tried to guess the effectiveness of one of the ones that was a targeted value versus the general values. Were you saying the general values, just reflecting on everything?
Yes. Yeah, so it was a control condition. I thought it was a control condition that works. And I honestly don't know that we should get too excited about its performance, given many things. But basically we just asked people, I'm happy to share the stimuli. If anyone is interested, we can share all of these stimuli. It basically just said, reflect on how engaged and committed you are to these different groups in your life, your religious commitments, your work commitments, and so on. And then on a scale of not very committed to very committed, they answered. And then we said, this is sort of diagnostic of who you are, and we're going to tailor your intervention to you. That worked bizarrely well.
So for those of you who are familiar with the values affirmation, in retrospect, it's very values affirmation-y.
But that wasn't word testing. It was a control condition. Yeah, Marty.
Just an idea about the future. I think you were working against a very tough baseline here, because a lot of very smart marketeers, etc., have tried to optimize gym use. So I wonder, and so I think there wasn't a lot of room left over for you to improve it against all those smart people working on it. I would have been surprised if you'd gotten something really big. But if instead of gym use, you took an endeavor which is very much for good, which there's no marketeers doing, for example, doing one kind act for a stranger every day, I have a feeling you'd get big effects here, and you'd be working against an easy baseline.
I mean, so I agree that there might be other really interesting things where we get bigger effects. I do want to make sure that the takeaway isn't that nothing works. We actually did quite well. 75% of our interventions significantly increased gym attendance. So at some level, it was a success. We did really well at increasing gym attendance. It's just that we didn't generate new scientific insights, which was our goal. Instead, what we basically found is that what we already thought worked still works. And we could trickle it up a little bit with some additions, but basically most of the things looked a lot like each other. But relative to nothing, we were able to really move the needle on gym visits quite robustly. So that is the good news. It's just that these specific new hypotheses, new scientific ideas that we were setting out to generate, that's where we failed. Yeah?
Would you characterize the task of the researchers as generating the best interventions they possibly could, or new questions that they'd like to test? Because it seemed they would help us. They would give a different spin on whatever we were seeing.
I would say it was more that scientists were interested in testing hypotheses they were curious about, and they were like, I'm going to throw in the 7 ingredients I'm sure will work.
It's a good question. I guess we don't know, right? There could be.
Yeah, maybe we should have a show of hands. How many of you who designed the study were focused on I want to, get the numbers up as high as possible?
At this point, no one's going to raise their hand.
Yeah. How many of you guys though were I have an insight I want to test and see if it was true? Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it was meant to be basic science in the field. So I think that is what we were encouraging them.
And you're out of time.
Am I out of time? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Angela, but she has interesting things to share, and I want to make sure she has time. But thanks, guys, and we could talk all day about this.
Yes, we could talk all day about it. Okay, let me be brief. So I'm in Danny Kahneman's apartment. Just need to name drop that. I'm in Danny Kahneman's apartment, and I'm about to leave. And just as I'm walking out the door, you say, BCFG, how'd that go? And I said, you can call it the 20 Failures Project, actually 19 out of 20, because none of the pre-registered hypotheses, in these experiments, good scientists that we are, we weren't trying to beat the no treatment control, and in most of these cases, we weren't trying to keep the minimum treatment best practice. We designed a really good control group for our intervention condition. And none of those pre-registered hypotheses were supported. So then ensued, to my delight, a series of emails and phone exchanges where I had to figure ground reversal. So for me, it was, of course, disappointing, devastating. But Danny thought there was, perhaps the most important scientific discovery of all therein. So what I will say first is that we emailed, this is post-apartmental, advice, we emailed the original research teams, and that's not all of you, right? So those of you who actually contributed study designs to the 24-hour fitness study, and we name dropped Danny without permission. We're like, Danny Kahneman gave us this great idea, which is we would like to know, in advance of getting your own data, what is the likelihood, you think, that your pre-registered hypothesis will be supported? And of course, since there was the 28 days of treatment hypothesis and then the second hypothesis, which is the treatment effect and the 28-day follow-up, we had to get 2 estimates. And here are the distributions. 40.71% is the average likelihood of I think that things are going to be good. And then of course more modest expectations, 31.29% about the hypothesis that there would be a treatment effect in the 28-day follow-up. We then decided to cast a wider net. We said, okay, well, interesting that this small sample of psychologists who design their own studies or make judgment about their own study, well, why don't we ask all of you, and thank you for the snowball sampling, some of your colleagues, to more or less answer the same questions. We added 2 more about the effect size, not just whether the results would be supportive of pre-registered hypotheses. And again, 2 on the so likelihood and effect size for the 28 days of treatment, and then the follow-up. we again name dropped Danny without his permission. And I should say that in both of these cases, I'll show you the new data next, but we excluded, those who had an inkling or maybe direct correspondence with either Katie or myself about the actual results. So these are naive behavioral scientists, as it were. I will tell you that in this larger sample, which is now larger than 92, but I decided to freeze the data on Monday and just do these quick and dirty analyses for you. The majority, 60%, are professors, and then we had a variety of other younger behavioral scientists. And the 12% of the recruited sample is excluded from this. And here are the distributions on expectations of treatment effects during the 28 days on the left, and then after in the next 28-day follow-up period. I have to say that during one of these exchanges, maybe the very first one, Danny asked me what my expectation was, and of course it's close talk and everything. And I said, I don't think in probabilities, which I can't believe I said to Danny Kahneman. I don't really think that way. And then Danny, you said, I think it's about 50%. And I think that that's what they think, right? Pretty damn good, 49.91%. And then again, in the follow-up, slightly more conservative, 30, but wildly wrong, right? So wildly wrong, wildly overconfident. Here are the effect size, or the treatment effect, estimates. We thought as a community that, and by the way, I will say for those of you who didn't click on the link that we sent you multiple times, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, basically there were these 4 questions, but you got to see screenshots of all of the everything that the participants got to see. So in all of the conditions, right? So if it was 2 conditions, you got to see both. You get to see the text messages. You can click on the pre-registration. And after reviewing that, the estimates here, thinking that there's going to be a 10.5% change in gym visits, or in the treatment group, less than that. This is a real rough cut of the data. It's obviously, we should do a mixed model, etc. But I will say that there does seem to me, if I eyeball it, looking at professors and postdocs who have more experience, they seem to be a little more sober than doctoral students, and other tend to be, more junior than that. So there's a little sobriety, but we're all drunk, I think is the take home. And I thought, and now this time I did ask permission, I thought if Danny had, some time, because he knew what you didn't know until now, a little bit earlier, I thought he might give us some analysis of this overconfidence. Is that okay?
That's a surprise.
Oh, I told you yesterday.
No, anyway. I think there is an interesting story about that overconfidence. I think it's really a dramatic result. It suggests that in some ways, we as a group are miscalibrated in a major way in our expectations about experiments, and it's worth thinking about. So here are a few hypotheses as to what might be happening. I think a key to that is a difference between within subject and between subject kind of thinking. And in the within subject kind of thinking, you see 2 conditions, and you compare 2 conditions. So, a trip to Rome, and an ice cream cone. That's something that in a within subject condition you expect to find. Between subjects, to get to between subject effect, you need a strong effect, not a clear effect, but a strong effect. So in the trolley problem, not pushing the fat man off the bridge, that's a strong effect. You get it between subjects, you don't need that. Now the interesting thing is that we, in many contexts, certainly in social psychology, in these experiments, we are planning between subject comparisons, but we are in a within subject frame of mind. And in the within subject frame of mind blinds us by itself to the size of the effect, because we see it clearly and we are tempted to think that it is strong. In addition, it turns out I think, a very powerful effect in all this, and that all these hypotheses are true. And this is true also for primary research and for the other things that don't replicate very well. They're all true. If you're going to show wrinkles to people and it's going to affect their walking speed, it's not going to speed it up. It's going to slow it down or do very little. So all our hypotheses are true. The question is how strong they are. And in the within subject experiment, we have no idea how strong they are, basically. And there is another wrinkle to that, which is sort of important, which is that by and large, we're blind to effect sizes. And we're blind mainly to the small effect sizes of our manipulations. Because, we say that, an effect size of 0.3 or 0.4 is a medium effect size. What it means really is that when you look at the dependent variable, 85 to 95% of the variance under the dependent variable that you're interested in is caused by things that you have no idea about. And that's a new thought to many people. So the combination, and by and large, we tend to neglect that completely. So that when you're planning an experiment, you are in the within subject frame of mind, you can see it happening, your hypothesis is true, and you have no idea of the strength of your hypothesis. And my submission is that this is going to have a number of effects. The first effect is you're going to be wildly overconfident about the results of your experiment because it's true. And you can see it, and you can taste it, and you feel it strong. I would suggest that there may be a temptation for people who can do that to p-hack in the service of truth, because they know they're right, and they are right. I mean, all these hypotheses are true. And then that if somebody else fails to replicate them, they won't believe the failure to replicate. And so all of these things, I think, are happening. And they're happening for a reason. And the two main reasons are both inevitable in some sense. We are in the within subject frame of mind, thinking about a between subject effect, and we're thinking about true hypotheses, and we just don't know their size, and we tend to exaggerate their size. So I think this is important. I was trying to tell Angela, this may be the most important thing you'll be doing in a while, is to study the miscalibration of the profession, because that seems to be a very general phenomenon. If it happens to 20 people who are leaders of the field, this must be telling us something important, and it's worth understanding, and it may be worth thinking, can be done about it.
Thank you, Danny. And I think we can't just roll into the next, let me tell you about a mega-analysis of, high school, because I feel like we should have some questions. And I don't know if I have answers, but maybe we could instead frame this as discussion. So I'll start with Gretchen, yeah.
The ex post correct answer to the question is 0% chance.
Correct.
That these, of course, we didn't know that when we were making our predictions. And since the right answer is way down there on the left-hand side of the graph, it's impossible to be underconfident. The only thing you can be is overconfident. So it seems like that was a preordained result that you would get.
Yeah, that's true, right? And I think that is also why we added the effect sizes, because as you can see with the previous slide, some people did predict negative effects. Treatments.
Oh, okay.
So I think you get a little bit of that, but your point is.
People don't. I think that the probability of 40% is an underestimate of what people really have when they're doing it. I would certainly not run a study, a pre-registered study with a probability of 40%. I think people really believed it was going to work. This is our normal state when we are running an experiment. So the miscalibration is worse than it appears in these data.
Either as a question or a comment, my guess would be that there might be variation also, like Bob was talking earlier about people doing lab studies versus field studies, and that some of this, I wonder if you got systematically lower estimates from scientists who are typically running real-world messy studies out in the environment compared to scientists who are typically running lab studies. Because when you can strip away all of the messiness, then we want to get bigger effect sizes, right? And so I'd be very curious, if you have 92 people, like there's got to be some variation in what they do.
Yeah, great idea. We'll get back to you on that. That's a terrific one. Colin, do you have your hand up? Oh, okay. John?
So just one thing for all of us to think about, which is when we're interpreting the results, in a way this is Gretchen's comment in disguise. You know, it's sort of, we can't think of 19 independent draws across the different studies that were run. And the reason is they're all correlated because of the fact they're all compared against the same benchmark, which might have been something that all of us underestimated in terms of how powerful. In fact, that was a theme that kind of came up earlier in the discussion. And so maybe there's, instead of 19 independent mistakes, there's just one mistake that we all made in this situation, which is like failing to recognize that the active control against which we were all being compared was in fact a very powerful intervention.
Yeah, great.
So, you and Katie will remember that when you asked me to join this project, I said, you know, there are no two people who have a better chance of succeeding at this than the two of you, but the chance of success is essentially zero. I mean, you can check the email. I think that's right. I did the survey, but I ticked that I knew some things, but I can tell you, I attempted to do them honestly, and my predictions were uniformly 10% and 5%, and a predicted effect size of 0. And why? It's not that I think you guys are bad social scientists. I think it's hard to get people to go to the gym. And so you picked a hard problem. And, you know, I'll just leave it at that. Maybe Linda and I will get into a longer. So I don't think the conclusion of this should be that we don't know anything about behavioral science. I think the conclusion of this ought to be that getting people to change their habits about exercise, and I would extend it to a lot of other self-control problems, is hard.
And not just for the reasons that were brought up, I think, but yeah.
Building on some of the earlier comments, I think there's, this is really something to that end subject. I think people as a group don't face behavioral obstacles. People individually do. And I think the analyses, at least as I understood, were really at an aggregate level. And what we found when we've done very large, not trying to advance science, right, really just applying existing techniques, is very similar to what you found, which is when we run a study, we find something, we do our best practice, and that has a pretty good short-term effect. But that everything else we try doesn't add on top of that. And I think it's because people are different. And one group of people may be struggling with one problem, another group may be struggling with another, but we don't have a micro theory about the obstacles people face. We talk about people as a
So
group.
1 out of the 600 people who got the temptation bundling, and they're kind of like, oh, this is what temptation bundling is, et cetera. Maybe one of them, it worked great, and it changed their lives forever. And then it gets washed out by however many
And
others.
that's what we've seen in our large studies. Not advancing science, but just taking all of your techniques and applying them in a finance study. We just find, look, it's really hard to get beyond baseline, and there's just tremendous variation within the population. And then when you aggregate up, you get a muddled middle.
Kate, I'm going to be the last comment, and then I'm going to transition to the thing else.
School stuff, yeah. Okay, so just on that, we are actually going to explore that. One of the things we like most about the mega study, the 63,000 people, is the ability we have to thin slice, which is rare. And so the machine learning team, one of their missions is to do that heterogeneity analysis and see, okay, maybe there were some big effects that were underlying, obviously properly corrected for hunting, because it will be a hunting expedition to some degree. But we'll look and see if there's some of that. I'm not sure.
Too strong of a control condition, idiosyncrasies, wrong problem, nobody can change it. Hopefully this whets your appetite. And I will say this, when I was listening to Bob's morning comments, and trying to process all of this as well, I thought big effects, right? There may not be zero, but there's some non-zero, positive number of big effects. And I will transition now to another experiment. It was not quite as ambitious and quite as large, but I think it actually is probably the largest experiment of its kind in schools. This was an experiment that was run in conjunction with my nonprofit, Character Lab. And the goal in this case was not to increase gym visits, but to increase report card grades according to official school records among high school students in a county in Florida outside of Disney World. And because the study that ended up being of the 5 studies that were run, not 19 studies, but 5, the study that was the most effective, and in this case, happily, the pre-registered hypotheses were exactly confirmed, because the lead researcher is here today. I don't want to steal her thunder, but I will say that the other studies did not have quite as unequivocal results, and I'll be brief about that just because the analyses are still being analyzed by the actual researchers, but I don't think they are in the other 4 cases, striking and unequivocal, so I'll just leave it at that. This is where the research took place. And at the end of the day, Katie and I are going, we started with optimism, a little pessimism. We're definitely ending the day with optimism, which is to get excited, we hope, with all this newfound wisdom about the new BCFG studies. When I say that this was run through Character Lab Research Network, I am truly hoping that all of you will decide, I should be working on teenagers, because behavior change in teenagers has to be more important than anything else I could work on. And we really do hope to entice you to do that, both with Character Lab, but also through BCFG. I'll tee up Lauren, who's going to come up in a moment, just by saying that for all 12 of the treatment arms across 5 different RCTs in these high school experiments that were conducted in January, taking a page from Katie's work, we thought about fresh starts as a time that we could change kids' behavior. But as a mother of 2 teenagers and a former high school teacher, I will say that there is something quite magical about the day you come back from your winter break. You've got that sobriety of like, well, the first and second marking period didn't go quite the way I wanted. But you feel like you have enough runway to change your grades. By contrast, if you try to do a behavior change experiment in high schools in September, the kids are like, yeah, I got this. This is going to be a great year. I'm going to do my homework every night. I'm going to wake up and go for a run before I have breakfast, neither of which they do. If you try to do it in April, little economists that they are, they're like, no, there's no way I'm going to change my final grade, so there's no motivation really to start studying, etc. So I think the entire project, I don't know because we didn't have, a parallel project running at a different time of year, but it was very strategically placed in January. And all of the high school students in this project were shown, these introductory slides, or everything was on Qualtrics. They had to choose a target class in which they were most motivated to achieve. So in the same sense that Katie and I tried to build in best practices to everyone's platform, we knew that teenagers are not trying to change all their grades at once. If you're already getting a high A in a class, you're not trying to change that. And if you really hate the teacher in a class and feel like you can't do it, you're probably not trying to change that grade either. So kids were able to set a target. These all ran during the school day, during a single class period. We intended to also text all of these teenagers for 28 days, just like we did in the gym program. But we couldn't get the technology to work as flawlessly as it would need to work. And so in this tournament, everybody's study designs were also handicapped because they had all designed one class period of interaction followed by 28 days of texting, and then we cut off the 28 days of texting. There was no texting. So here are the 5 ideas that were launched, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to allow Lauren to come up and talk about the benefits of advice giving, which is her original idea. I'm also really happy that she was my doctoral student. She's now a postdoc with IELT. Katie and I got a year of Lauren as a postdoc, and you're also on the job market in the fall, and you're so great. So I'd be happy to talk about any of these other studies during breaks or during lunch. But for now, and I'm sorry I put a massive head of you up here. I know. Well, I didn't know if you'd be here. She's also massively pregnant, so I was like, could have not been here, and then I would need to give credit where credit's due. So Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, thank you for moving to the next slide, because I don't particularly enjoy looking at my own skin pores. Yeah, so this is our advice-giving intervention. And when you hear that an advice-giving intervention was effective, I think what you probably have in mind is that we went and we gave these students who were struggling really good advice. But what you can see from just these initial screens is that it says at the top, be a coach. So the idea of this intervention is that, right, we're all of us in this study are trying to solve for the same problem, which is how do you motivate kids to achieve to higher levels? I think the standard response, the common sense response, the response that's probably also supported by standard economic theory, is that if people are struggling, they need more information. They lack some sort of knowledge, and we are going to give them advice or resources, and we're going to fill that gap and help them achieve to higher levels. And what our team did in designing this intervention is we thought, well, maybe that's actually solving for the wrong problem. Right? Maybe the problem is when kids aren't working hard enough, and they aren't motivated enough, maybe the problem is that they're not confident in their abilities, right? Like every kid kind of knows that they should go home and do their homework. They know that they should study for their quiz, right? It's not like calculus where they actually don't know the answer. They actually need more information. And so when we launched this advice-giving intervention, we literally said to people whose achievement we wanted to improve, we said, hey, can you give advice to somebody else? And so you can see it says, you've been picked for this special opportunity, right? Receiving advice has the advantage of actually giving people information. They learn something. In this intervention, so these are our screens of the type of questions that our advisors answered, right? So 9th through 12th graders are now advisors to younger students, and they answer questions like, what advice would you give to another student who wants to avoid procrastinating? And they fill in an answer. Or there were some multiple choice questions where they have to choose and give advice through multiple choice. Basically, students in this intervention learned nothing, right? It's a psychological intervention, and yet we didn't teach them anything. So I was actually telling Dan Heath, who was a marketing guru, right? He's great at marketing ideas. And he said, Lauren, I like your intervention, but no one's going to remember it because you're not putting it in the context of something they already understand. He said, in Hollywood, right, when a producer goes to a studio executive, they pitch their idea in terms of something they already know. So when the producer of the movie Speed went to a Hollywood executive, he said, you know what I want to do? I want to create a movie, and the movie is going to be like just like that movie where there was a bomb on an airplane, and the airplane has to keep going, except this is going to be on a bus. So if I had to characterize my intervention as a TV show, this is like the Seinfeld of interventions, right? Like, what do we teach students? Nothing. It's a psychological intervention. They must have learned some sort of belief or attitude. No, absolutely nothing, right? The kids in this intervention just gave advice to others. And these are the results of the intervention that we pre-registered 2 primary hypotheses. The first is that we would increase grades in that target class. So we thought to the extent that this is a motivational intervention, it makes sense that we would improve grades in the subject in which students are most motivated to improve. We also pre-registered that we would increase grades in the students' math class. Math is a subject in which many students are particularly anxious. And so to the extent that advice giving increases confidence, we thought it would be particularly effective in this subject area. The last thing which I'll briefly note is that we didn't find heterogeneous effects. We had many secondary hypotheses about, well, maybe advice giving will be more effective for women than men. Maybe it'll be more effective for minorities than majority members. Maybe at certain grade levels it'll be more effective. Maybe it'll be more effective for lower achievers versus higher achievers. None of those interactions panned out. It's possible we were slightly underpowered, but I think the main takeaway is that advice giving seems to have had a universal effect across all of these demographic groups and really benefited students over one entire academic quarter. I'll just briefly end by saying this is slightly ironic given the topic of my intervention, but this whole process has been so gratifying, mainly because I've received advice from two totally awesome mentors throughout who have been my collaborators on this project. So I just wanted to thank Angela and Katie for really championing this idea and helping me throughout. So that's it.